Hey, what's up? This is Chosen, and this video is going to be 10 champions that I believe are underrated in the raid community, so let's get into it. Alrighty, so recently I've been doing a lot of like streams and champion guides, so I like to be creative and switch it up every now and then, so I thought this would be kind of a nice little break in the regular content I've been putting out. So I'm just gonna, go over a few champions that aren't necessarily meta or amazing or overpowered, but are better than they get credit for. So I would love to hear what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments afterwards if I missed a few that I should have gone over and all that. So yeah, I'll just start right away here with Adriel, who is in the Sacred Order, is this one right here, the Magic Affinity support. Adriel is an amazing early to mid game support. Probably not super amazing endgame, but is still viable. And the reason being is most of us, our strongest kind of affinity is magic. And she has an increased ally speed in all battles by 21% as long as they're magic. Which, a lot of us can assemble a pretty good magic team, which makes Adriel's aura amazing. And then, her A1 is a 20% chance of placing decreased accuracy, which is useful. And then this A2, heal all allies by 20% and place a reflect damage buff for 2 turns. You can get that to a 3-turn cooldown. And then A3 is an attack all with a 50% chance of placing a 50% decrease attack as long as it's critical. So decrease attack is one of the best debuffs in the game. Speed aura is one of the best auras in the game. So just an all-around kind of generally useful hero that I think is a little bit underrated. All right, number 2, I'm going to be going over Bog Walker in the Lizardmen. Bog Walker is this one right here. Alrighty, so A1 is attack one enemy, 30% chance of placing a 50% decrease attack debuff. That's an amazing A1. A 50% decrease attack on your A1 is super useful basically everywhere. The A2 is an attack all that places a 30% increased defense buff on all allies for 2 turns. You can get this all the way down to a 3-turn cooldown. Again, that is an ability that's useful everywhere. And then the passive ability is place a 30% reflect damage buff on all allies for 1 turn when hit with a critical hit. So, an interesting one there, but definitely not the reason that he is good. The aura is just kind of a general sustain aura, kind of like a poor man's Lord Champfort in terms of the aura. Increase ally HP in dungeons by 25%, but he is also force affinity, which, most of us struggle to assemble a good force team, and Bog Walker can be somebody that you can bring along to help you in dungeons and the clan boss. He places good, buffs and debuffs and can just generally be useful. Next, I'm going to go over one that I actually have a champion guide for that I'll try to remember to put in the video description, and it is going to be Spirit Host. Spirit Host is not usually mentioned when people talk about the best heroes in the game, but in terms of the early to mid game, Spirit Host is amazing. She is farmable in the campaign, so it's very easy to acquire her, and you can max her out with no skill books. She's got an aura that is useful just in general. It's going to be placing speed in all battles for all allies by 10%. The A1 is going to help her sustain a little bit. She heals by 50% of the damage inflicted. The A2 is a 50% increased attack buff on all allies for 2 turns that you can get to a 3-turn cooldown. And then removing all debuffs on all allies and placing a block debuff on all allies buff for 1 turn is a pretty game-changing ability there, even though it is on a big cooldown. So Spirit Host, again, just kind of a lot of general utility in the early to mid game. Next, I'm going to go over Czar Gala in the Orcs. She is this one here. A1, attack 1 enemy, 50% chance of placing a 25% weaken debuff for 1 turn. Attack 1 enemy, instantly activate cracked armor if the target is killed by this attack, and cracked armor is this one here. Attack all enemies 3 times after the first hit, has a 50% chance of placing a 60% increased defense or a 60% decreased defense debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. So Czar Gala works really well in like a mid-game arena nuking strategy, and this is also really good for like dungeons in general and stuff. You know, a lot of times in the arena, you have like your speed aura, your booster, and then your debuffer, and then your nuker. And Czar Gala can be great as the debuffer. You know, she can place this 60% all damager, decrease defense on every person on the enemy team, and allow your nuker to do a ton more damage. So she's going to be useful in the arena and also dungeons as well. Next, we're going to go over a fun one here. Soros in the Lizardmen. Soros is actually an uncommon, but is kind of gaining traction recently in the raid community because he can actually farm the end game. He can farm 12-3 on Brutal in like 7 or 8 seconds. So he's an uncommon that's basically free to ascend and max out. So you can get a fully loaded, maxed out Soros basically for free, and he's able to farm the end game. Also, if you are a new player, you're going to want to build yourself a Soros because you start with a Magic Affinity champion, and that means you're going to be really struggling with the levels that are Force Affinity. Well, that's where Soros comes in. He is Spirit and counters Force Affinity, so not only is he awesome in the early game, but he's also viable as an endgame campaign farmer. So his A1 is simple, attack all enemies AoE. And then his A2 is attack all enemies 2 times and places heal reduction, but that's not what makes him good. So every single attack he does is attacking all enemies, so he's a good one to have, especially if you're a new player. Next, we're going to go into the Demon Spawn and go over Diabolist. Again, she is farmable in the campaign, so very easy to get and max out. And if we go over her abilities here, most people just assume that she's trash, but attack one enemy with a 10% chance to place a sleep debuff for 1 turn. A2, attack all enemies, place a 30% increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns. And this A3 is fill the turn meter of all allies by 15% and decrease the turn meter of all enemies by 15%. You can get that to a 4-turn cooldown. So she's kind of like a poor man's apothecary, whereas she can kind of be your booster in the early to mid game arena and can be useful in dungeons as well, because you're always going to want kind of a support, like a speed and turn meter support. So you know, a lot of people think she's just garbage, but she's actually not in like the early to mid game, so I wanted to throw her on this list. Next, I'm going to be going Dark Elves. Sylar. Sylar's A1 is attack all enemies, so it's always cool to have an AoE A1. A2 is attack all enemies with an 80% chance to place a 50% decrease accuracy debuff for 2 turns. And then this ability here is what makes her amazing. A3, place a 30% decrease speed debuff on all enemies for 2 turns and decrease the turn meter of all enemies by 40%. So this can be great in dungeons and the arena, just kind of generally useful. You can get that down to a 4-turn cooldown. Alrighty, and next is going to be another one that I have a champion guide for. We're going to go on the High Elves and go to Jingle Hunter. A1, attack one enemy 2 times with a 40% chance of placing a 30% decreased speed debuff for 2 turns if critical. That's a very good ability for dungeons. A2 is attack one enemy with a 50% chance of placing a freeze debuff on all enemies for 1 turn if this attack kills an enemy. This is a very good ability for the arena. Cold Snap, attack all enemies, decrease the turn meter by 20% if this attack is critical. Fill this champion's turn meter by 10% if this attack is critical. Very good ability for the arena and in general. And then increase all ally speed by 24% in the arena. So he is a great kind of mid-game transitioning to end-game arena leader that can do really well for you, that I think is kind of underappreciated. Alrighty, and next we're going to be going to the Lizardmen. And I had to throw at least one legendary in the video. Dracomorph is a legendary that I really never heard brought up as far as being good, so I wanted to kind of put him in here. A1, attack one enemy, will attack one random enemy with enemy with any surplus damage if the target is killed. Damage inflicted is equal to triple the surplus damage, so it can kind of snowball there a little bit. A decent A1. A2 is attack 3 times at random, has a 75% chance of placing a 5% poison debuff for 2 turns. We can get that to a 3-turn cooldown and buff the chance all the way up to 100. So as long as you have good accuracy, Dracomorph will be a beast against the clan boss. And then place both a 25% weaken and a 30% decreased defense debuff on all enemies for 2 turns, and you can get that down to a 3-turn cooldown to basically be permanent. So that is an awesome ability for dungeons. Dracomorph has a lot of utility in the clan boss and dungeons. And lastly, I'm going to go to the Dark Elves and go over Payne Keeper. Payne Keeper is another one that's starting to kind of get traction in their raid community as far as being good, but I wanted to throw her on this list just to bring her to your attention. A1 is attack 1 enemy 2 times and fill this champion's turn meter by 15%. Turn meter and speed stuff is always great to have on your A1. A2 is attack all enemies, then heal all allies by 25% of this champion's max HP. So that's the better version of the heal, is on this champion's max HP, because you can stack HP on them and it will heal everyone by that amount. So a really good A2 there. And then A3 is decrease the cooldown of all ally skills by 1 turn. That's a very game-changing ability that you can get to a 4-turn cooldown to really help you just kind of synergize in those arena fights and clan boss and dungeons. She doesn't have a lot of utility against the clan boss, but she could be a cooldown reducer and a healer. So Payne Keeper is one that I admittedly don't have, but when I was just kind of looking over the game in general, I was like, you know, I do want to put her on this list and kind of bring her to people's attention because she has the ability to be absolutely game-changing. So yeah, that's going to do it for... I don't know why I'm getting this one here. That's going to do it for this video on 10 heroes that I believe are currently kind of undervalued in the raid community. Obviously, there's going to be some that I missed, and I could have done more. You know, I could go on and on about champions I think are underrated, but these are kind of the 10 relevant ones I felt were kind of the most overlooked at the moment. So let me know down in the comments what you think and who I should have included on this list. I always love to hear what you guys think. So yeah, as always, thank you for watching. Have a good rest of your day. Peace.